I have a new guest today. He's never been on, and he is attorney James Porfido. He is a legal analyst. He's a criminal defense attorney. I think he's also a law professor. Here he is, and we just uh, we just were able to meet. We realized that we went to the same school. He went for law school. I went for my master's degree. Yes, it worked
It
beautifully,
works.
James. It was so
I'm here.
smooth. I can't believe it. So anyway, so what we're going to be talking about today is something that drives most of us in our community crazy, and that is justice delayed is justice denied. When things take so long that it feels like nothing's ever going to get done. In the meantime, you're suffering, your kids are suffering, your family is suffering. And so James has a lot of experience in this area because you've been doing it for quite a while. Before we even get into where you officially introduce yourself, James, what is a legal analyst? I saw that you're a legal analyst.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Lisa, for having me on. I appreciate it and the opportunity. A legal analyst is I have for more than 25 years appeared in various forms of media, whether it's TV or radio, podcasts, talking about cases that are in the news, those cases that are prominent cases, which probably most of the listeners are familiar with or have seen or experienced over the years, like the O.J. Simpson case, the Menendez brothers, Scott Peterson. Those are a few of the cases that I've given commentary on. And really, being a legal analyst is offering, I'll say critique regarding the performances of the attorneys, what could be done differently. If you were handling the case based on your experience and your background, whether you would be bringing in different witnesses or how you would be asking witnesses questions, what would be important for a jury to understand in those particular cases with respect to what the issues are, the facts, the evidence, really being critical of all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, how does one even become that? Because that's very different from being a lawyer, I would imagine.
Well, no, it's really being a lawyer, but maybe the next level of lawyering,
Mhm.
based on your background and your experience. If you have been in the courtroom and you've handled high-profile cases, which thankfully and luckily I did, you get that experience and you're familiar with some of the issues and how to communicate. So much is about communication with a jury in those venues, in those particular cases. They're all jury trials. And it really is a lot about, and this is really the class I teach as a professor, as an adjunct professor at Seton Hall Law School, is advocacy and persuasion, or persuasion and advocacy, which is really storytelling. It's really the ability to tell a story from beginning to end. And that's really what a trial is. If you were to break it down into its simplest terms, it's really about telling the story on behalf of your client, whether you represent the state as a prosecutor or the defendant, the accused, as their attorney, as legal counsel.
So you just gave me another thing that I realize we have in common, and that's storytelling and persuasion. That's what we do with our clients as well. I used to teach high school English, and I also taught creative writing. But everything is about showing and not telling, and how to be as persuasive as possible. So we do a lot with working on presentation, putting together your documentation, but making it more human and real and something that people can connect to. So I'm thrilled to hear that you also value proper communication. I feel like it's the basis of everything. And we teach strategic communication more than anything with all of our clients, whatever stage they're at in the process. So, but James, tell us more about your background, not just as a legal analyst. Like what brought you
Sure,
here?
sure. So I've been an attorney for over 35 years. A large part, or the beginning stages, were as a prosecutor. So I represented the state and I prosecuted criminal cases in the Morris County Prosecutor's Office in New Jersey. I became a certified criminal trial attorney, certified by the Supreme Court in New Jersey as a trial attorney, criminal trial attorney. Then I went out into the defense world and I became a defense attorney and really took the experience and the background, becoming an effective advocate on behalf of the state. and using that in a different venue. And really what I say is I simply moved from one side of the courtroom to the other side of the courtroom. I just shifted counsel table and moved from the state into the defense world. And that's where I've been, and that's where I've been practicing over the years. And now I'm of counsel with the firm. I closed my practice in 2023, and I'm of counsel with the firm. We have about 65 attorneys in New Jersey. The name of the firm is Einhorn, Barbarito, Frost, Botwinick, Nunn, and Musmano. Don't ask me to say it again. It's a lot of names. And we have 65 attorneys, and we practice in various departments and sections. And I consult in the criminal section. I'm of counsel there. So that's what I'm doing now. So I'm not actively engaged in practice of law. So I'm not taking on cases. I also have a role as a professor doing the teaching, which is, it's a part-time thing. So I enjoy that as well. So I do have a lot of different interests, and this has allowed me and freed up some time to do that.
Yeah, so when we were just talking off camera, you mentioned that you have a background with some domestic violence as well, because you know that this community that you're speaking to is dealing with that. It's rampant. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that maybe influences your view on some of these cases?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as an early prosecutor in the early days, I'll say when I was rising through the ranks in the prosecutor's office, I started out prosecuting family part cases, and that consisted of juvenile delinquency cases. Those are juveniles. Anyone under the age of 18 is considered a juvenile if they're charged with a criminal offense. It's an act of juvenile delinquency. The big difference between the juvenile system and the adult system is rehabilitation versus punishment. That's the kind of the distinction between the two. And except in serious crimes, serious offenses, there's something called a waiver process to waive them to adult court, where they're treated the same as an adult. Part of that also was prosecuting domestic violence cases. And, these were probably the much more serious cases that you would encounter, where people committed criminal acts and there was a restraining order issued. The victim of the domestic violence, typically a woman or girlfriend, would be seeking out an order of protection as a result of the criminal conduct. So there was a lot of overlap. There was both criminal and the family part domestic violence. So, I learned a lot, and my clerkship before I even became a prosecutor was in family law. So I saw a lot of domestic violence cases, family part cases that came under that umbrella. But I became pretty proficient at prosecuting domestic violence cases. I was very well aware of the cycle of abuse and these situations where the victim of domestic violence comes in and they seek out an order of protection, and then they recant or they say, no, it didn't really happen the way I said it happened, and they don't move forward in the process to get a final restraining order, an order of protection, or they get an order of protection and it really means nothing. They let the violent offender come back into the house, and then the cycle of abuse continues, where it goes on and on and on. and I had a couple of really serious cases through my career as a prosecutor and also in domestic as a defense attorney, handling domestic violence cases in serious situations. So I'm very familiar with it and very well aware of the process, um, the prerequisites to get a restraining order, what's called a temporary restraining order, an application that's done ex parte without the other party being present. That's the temporary order that's issued. And then it becomes a final order. And that's where there's a due process issue where the accused has the right to be represented, of course, and dispute the allegations and put their side on, and then ultimately the judge has to make the determination whether or not to issue that final restraining order.
Yeah, New Jersey, where you're based, right? They have some of the strongest restraining orders, I think, from what we've heard in the country.
They do, and It's very difficult. There are lifetime orders. They don't just go away, where some states, they kind of dissolve over a period of years if there are no issues that result in violations of a restraining order or additional acts of domestic violence. These orders kind of just go away, they disappear. But in New Jersey, it's a lifetime, and there's a process to dissolve a restraining order, and it's rather difficult. It's challenging for people to come before a judge and say, "Hey, I want to get rid of a restraining order because I haven't had any contact with this person for 5 years." You actually have to get that person, the victim, or the plaintiff, the moving party for that restraining order. You have to get them involved in the process so that they either consent or they have to be a party to the litigation to dissolve the restraining order. It's called a Carfagno. That's the famous case in New Jersey, but it's called Carfagno issues or factors to be considered by the court to dissolve a restraining order.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I know we definitely talked to somebody, a woman actually, who had a restraining order, a lifetime restraining order against her in New Jersey, and was having no luck getting it dissolved.
It's
So,
it's extremely difficult. I've handled a number of those over the years, and um, one resulted in a full-blown hearing, and ultimately the judge did dissolve the restraints. And these restraining orders are very challenging because they do impede your ability to travel. Getting onto a plane just to go from one city to another city or one location to another location, you're kind of flagged when there's a restraining order issue. In New Jersey as well, it's a real impediment to trying to possess a firearm. If you have a history where there's a documented history, a restraining order has been issued. That's almost an automatic disqualifier from your ability to possess a firearm.
really, wow,
Yeah.
didn't
Yes.
realize.
Yeah. It's a
So,
big deal.
yeah, yeah. So I know we're going to also get into the whole justice thing, and we know that that with these complex family court cases, things take so long. In my own case, I mentioned I was in court for about 10 years, and that's because there were so many delays to get an order written up in Connecticut, where part of my case was it would take about 120 days. That was the maximum, but it felt like every single judge waited until the maximum. So things went on and on and on. So are there misconceptions that you've seen regarding the impression people have about how court is supposed to be versus how it really is when it comes to how fast justice will be served?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I was a criminal and am a criminal practitioner. So in that world, in the criminal world, people just think, well, I'm going to go in and tell the judge that I didn't do it, and it's all over. And I say it's not quite that simple. There's a process that has to be employed, and that's called a trial. That you don't get a chance to really talk to the judge. That's why you hire an attorney, but
Mm-hmm.
the attorney also prevents you from being able to tell your side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So
Tell us
it's,
why. Because in our world too, they think I'm going to tell the judge and I have all this information.
oh, sure. And one of the things I say, practically speaking, in motor vehicle stops is you're never going to win your case on the side of the road arguing with the police officer. That's just not going to work. And so many people think, well, if I just explain to the police officer, and that doesn't go so well. And
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes agitated, and then it escalates. And then before you know it, you have criminal charges because you're resisting arrest. And, it just doesn't go well. And so I always say, you're not going to win your case or argue your case on the side of the road and convince the police officer that you didn't do what they're saying you did. Take the ticket and fight it in court. Don't think you're going to win your case on the side of the road. And so often people think that if they get the opportunity just to say what they want to say, it's over and done with. And unfortunately, it's not that at all. There is a
Mm-hmm.
process that has to be gone through, and it's unfortunate that it takes a long time. It is a long process. Um, in domestic violence, New Jersey has a turnaround time. You get a temporary restraining order, you're supposed to have a hearing within 10 days. to get that final restraining order. That does not always happen. I can tell you just the backlog of cases that the judges have in the family court handling the domestic violence cases. You may not be reached. And if you have a case that's contested, in other words, the other party's not in agreement that a restraining order should be issued, you could be litigating that case. And I was involved in one that was well over a year
Mm-hmm.
trying to defend, and in this case, I was defending the female. The husband was seeking an order of protection against her, but he was really utilizing the court system as a weapon against her, and that's something I think you're familiar with and you've spoken about. I saw that.
Yeah, yeah. So when you talk about the delays regarding restraining orders, one of the big things that our clients are struggling with is when they haven't been able to see their children, often because of some allegation that they're dangerous or whatever the case is, or even that their ex just isn't following a parenting plan. And so when they go back to court, they think, well, the judge is just going to fix it and I'm going to get my time back. Have you
Mhm.
ever been involved with cases like that where there's allegations of abuse? The children are also covered under a restraining order temporarily, and the parent has not had due process, and time keeps passing, and things keep getting worse because then the person almost becomes a stranger to their children.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Parental alienation is a big factor in domestic violence cases where there are children and you have parents that are, accusing each other. Maybe there are cross complaints or one party's accusing the other party. And part of the restraining order is a prohibition from having contact not only with the victim, but as well returning to the scene of the domestic violence, which is the marital home where the children reside. And it may also include a restriction against having contact with the children. And that is a huge factor in some of these cases. And it oftentimes, when these cases are delayed and they drag on and on, one of the parents is not having access to the child. And many times I've had to make motions or applications to the court to grant visitation. Where there's a curbside drop off at the police station, they're not good situations. They're really, and the kids really suffer the most, quite frankly, in those situations, because I can't imagine, that they can just forget about this whole history that's happened between their parents. But that's been very common. I can tell you that many cases I've handled over the years where we've had to go back to the court and ask for permission, and under some parameters, whether they're supervised or whether it's done with a drop off at a police station under supervision, things like that. And nobody's winning in that situation. I have to say that's not a victory for anybody.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this, James, but this is so common that our book that just came out this past month is called When Your Ex Turns the Kids Against You, because it's a huge, huge issue in our community. And I'd say probably 80 plus percentage of our clients dealing with an ex who is weaponizing the justice system is also weaponizing their children and trying to use all kinds of ways to keep them away from the kids,
Well,
or accusing them of alienation when there has been abuse or neglect, and they're not being believed. So it's really, really tricky.
Well, I could take it one step further where the custodial parent um, basically coaches the child into saying that the other parent committed a criminal act, and then
Mm-hmm.
they are arrested, and now you have to disprove that this ever happened. And in my practice area, I specialized in sex crimes and child abuse, and because that's what I prosecuted, so I naturally took that over to the defense world. You would have these allegations being made against a parent, and it was just horrible, horrible, and it's just a terrible thing and unimaginable. And ultimately, to have that case dismissed, but during the interim, while that case is pending or lingering, that parent is denied visitation and access to the child because now they're a victim of a crime.
Mm-hmm.
So naturally they're not going to be able to, you know, speak to them, communicate with them, have contact with them. And it's some horrible situations that I've been a part of where I've represented someone in those situations where they've been wrongfully accused or falsely accused of a crime. And it really wasn't the child. They were just a pawn in the process. And, you know, you have a very active law enforcement community where they become overly aggressive and they accept the word of the child and they don't do a real thorough, complete investigation. And ultimately, you're representing someone that's been falsely accused, and rather than them being presumed innocent, they're presumed to be guilty. And you have
Mhm.
to undo that. And it's very challenging and very difficult. And I can tell you, very emotional.
Yeah, there's people who are listening now who will be listening later who can really relate to this. How do you, as an attorney, win these cases? How do you support, or what resources do you recommend to a parent who has been falsely accused and all of this time is passing and they're feeling such rage and a sense of injustice as well as despair that this is ever going to be fixed?
Well, unless they have the capability to represent themselves, although I find that it's very difficult for someone that's so invested and involved in a case on a personal level to handle the legal representation, which is a process. I mean, you have to be somewhat familiar with the terms of art, you know, how to make an argument, how to present to the court um, the legal precedents, the cases that support your position. It's not easy. But my advice to someone in those situations is you number one need to have a really good, competent, capable attorney on your side, someone that is familiar with the process, not only the process but the players. That's a big,
Mhm.
big ingredient that people don't factor in, and it really should be factored in. Is knowing the courts and being familiar with the lay of the land, so to speak. So that you know you have an attorney that gets it, that you can have a
Mhm.
communication with and be comfortable with that attorney, that they relate to you and the concerns that you have, and they're willing to go to bat for you and fight for you on that level. And if they don't, maybe that's not the right attorney for you. Maybe you need to jump ship and find another attorney, but you do need a really aggressive advocate in your corner to fight for you in those situations. And it is a fight. Sadly, it is a fight. You need to get into court and you need to tell the court that you're being victimized in the situation and the children are being victimized. And you may have to retain experts to become involved, to do evaluations and get the permission of the court to allow for that. It's not uncommon that that happens.
Yeah, and so, but evaluations are certainly helpful, but again, that takes a lot of time. A lot of times, our clients have guardian ad litems or forensic investigators who are working on figuring out what's happening, but those often take at least 6 months to a year, and so time keeps passing. Is there
Right.
anything, like, how do you, like, what can you tell a person emotionally, like how to deal with all this, like, to live their, how can they still continue to live their life while they're in this limbo of like what's going to happen and when is it going to get fixed, because we get very, very impatient.
It's very stressful. I mean, I cannot imagine the situation that some of my clients have been in, and you know, I can't relate to it, but I have to relate to it. I have to understand and be sympathetic to it, and compassionate for what they're going through and how difficult and challenging it is. And I, honestly, it's something that causes a lot of mental anxiety and stress and distress. And it's a really hard process. And you know, the best that you can do is to try to move things along as quickly as they can, because again, nobody is winning when this drags on and on and on. And you know, the sad part about it is the parents have become adversarial. They're almost enemies. You know, they're willing to destroy each other at any cost, but
Hmm.
there may be children involved, and unfortunately, they're not taking a step back to look at that. That those are they're ultimately the victims in the case, And regardless of what the outcome of the matrimonial action is that's going on, they're going to have to be able to communicate at some level for the sake of their children.
Yeah. So I was going to say, this is like a double question. Any suggestions? Because I know you don't have answers for how to get this moved along, but suggestions, and also make sure to tell us about your book.
Sure, sure. Yeah, my suggestions would be, again, you really need somebody that knows the lay of the land, somebody that has a, a pipeline to the court, somebody that can move your case along, somebody that has a proven track record of getting the results that you're looking to get. And that's part of the inquiry of an attorney. And listen, I have often said, and it's terrible to say this, but I've often said to potential clients, why don't you let me interview me rather than you interview me? Because the first question you ask me is how much I'm going to charge you. That's really not the first question. That's an important question. It's an important issue that we need to talk about. But really, you should be asking me, what's my level of experience? What's my background? What's my training? How many of these types of cases have I handled? What is my rate of success?
Mm-hmm.
What do you view as success? Are there different levels of success? These are the questions that are important. Can you communicate with me? Can you look me in the eyes and tell me a story and feel comfortable with me that I'm listening to you and that I get it and that I'm able to communicate to you on a level that you understand and not be a lawyer? That's
Mm-hmm.
Being a lawyer is one thing. That's in the courtroom, but being outside the courtroom, I got to be a human being. I start talking down to you and talking to you as an attorney and talking in legal terms and things like that. That's not really effectively communicating. So
Mm-hmm.
um, that's really important, and I feel that that's a big part of the process. Knowing the lay of the land, though, is so critical. Like you know, who are the courts? Who's in the court staff? I have to say, in all my years of experience, the court staff was so significant, and I always made sure that I got along well with them and that they viewed me as a nice person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they had respect for me, um, that I had respect for them equally.
Because
And
they talk, people talk to each other.
of course they do. And they could say, hey, that Jim Porfido, he's a really nice guy. He's a good lawyer, too. He comes in and he's prepared and he fights and he's emotional. And, you know, these things matter. Like these are the
Mm-hmm.
intangibles people don't really grasp onto, but they mean something. So if I call the court and I say, hey, I got to adjourn this case for a day because I've got some other case and I can't really get out of it, that's the person that's going to go to the judge and say, hey, Mr. Porfido called. He needs another day to because he's got some conflicts. That person is going to go to the judge and make sure that you get that extra day. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
your adversary will say, no, we got to go to court today, and you have to fight just to get the case put off for one day. Well, the court staff is integral in that process, and that's just one example of the
Mm-hmm.
many examples in which they are so important. And you value and respect people in their positions regardless of what they're doing, and that's important.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So I know we're almost out of time, but tell us a bit about your book.
Yeah, I got to try to turn my I got to get it into the frame here. I, I had it. I had it, but I moved everything around. So the name of the book is, and I'm going to move my phone. Here we go. There we go. Unequal Justice, The Search
Mm-hmm.
for Truth to Balance the Scales. And I don't know that I can show you the cover, or maybe I can
Yeah,
if I
yeah,
move.
we see
Oh,
most of it.
uh, let's see. There we go. So it's
Yeah.
Lady Justice, and Lady Justice wears a blindfold. Why? Because she's supposed to be blind and not predisposed to decide the case one way or another. And equally, the scales of justice are supposed to be in balance. In this particular depiction on the cover of the book, Lady Justice, the scales are somewhat imbalanced. So they're tipped in favor. And my view of this really was as I practiced more and more in my years of experience, and I guess I became older and wiser. I don't know. I saw that the system really was geared more towards the prosecution and much more in favor. And I can kind of dovetail that into domestic violence and talk about that a little bit. But I found that the system was more geared towards the prosecution, where they got the benefit of the doubt more than they needed to be. Quite frankly, I would often say that I felt I was fighting an unfair fight because the judges and the prosecutors were aligned against me, and I was
Mm.
fighting a very unfair fight. But I found that the constitutional rights of my clients were being compromised. Their Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, the Sixth Amendment right, which is the right to trial and the right to confront the witnesses that are accusing you. Those were being sacrificed along the way, and I found them to be very significant issues. And ultimately, when COVID struck, the system kind of bent over backwards just to keep cases moving, which I had no problem with. But when you had clients in jail, and I had 7 clients in custody at one time in jail, and I used to say, I'm not a public defender, I'm a private attorney. For me to have 7 clients in jail at one time, that's not speaking well. And some of them were not accused of earth shattering events.
Hmm.
And that was the Criminal Justice Reform Act in New Jersey, which eliminated cash bails, and basically it backfired. And I feel it's not working effectively because it really mandated that people would be arrested and held until they had a detention review hearing. And what happened was that the probation officers would put certain data into the computer, and it would spit out an algorithm, a mathematical calculation, which was presented to the prosecutor and the judge and ultimately to the defense. And that's what was relied upon. So if you had a numerical score that looked like um, there was a possibility that you would be convicted or that you had some prior history, and you would not be getting out of jail. You'd be sitting there waiting for your day in court. And that became a real issue um, over the course of my career, because I had to get out of many cases because I found that prosecutors were utilizing the system and wasting valuable time and court appearances, dragging cases on to deplete the retainer. And ultimately, I'd have
Hmm.
to get out of the case because the client couldn't afford to continue to pay me to represent
Yeah.
them. And that was happening all too often. But to dovetail into the domestic violence world, there have been a lot of abuses. And I found this when I represented people that were charged with acts of domestic violence. And it could be something like they had an argument, and the other party, let's say the spouse or the girlfriend, whatever it may be, partner, got a restraining order against this individual. And I would say, an argument is not really what was contemplated in the big scheme of things, because you're going to have marital disagreements. That's just part of a marriage. I mean, it may not even be a healthy marriage, but I think probably a healthy marriage, you probably have disagreements, and you speak your
Hopefully.
mind. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but that doesn't rise to the level of domestic violence. And I found that many judges were bending over backwards to issue restraining orders in cases where I did not feel it was appropriate to do so. And a lot of times, and I'd be careful what I say, but it was utilized as a tool in a matrimonial case to get one of the parties out of the house, because then you'd have a tactical advantage in negotiation. So I found a lot of abuses there where people should not have had final restraining orders issued, but they were issued because the courts were very reluctant not to issue a restraining order because, it was a lot of CYA. If something were to happen, they could say, well, I issued the restraining order. There's nothing more I could do.
Yeah,
But
it sounds like you're talking a little bit about the silver bullet strategy.
yeah, yeah. Sadly, though, and I understand it from a judge's perspective, they don't want to make the wrong call. You don't want to make a bad call on a case and say, I could have, I should have, and I didn't. You know,
Hmm. Oh, wait, your volume just went out for a second. You probably got a call.
okay, are we there? Back.
Yes.
All right, sorry about
Yeah.
that.
That's okay.
Yeah,
That's okay.
so
We only have about two more minutes because I have a client.
sure, sure. So yeah, that it could happen, and it did happen from time to time, and it was very disheartening to me because true victims of domestic violence, those that were subject to physical abuse, they've got bruises on their face. They're in the courtroom waiting to get a final restraining order. They got to wait in line behind these other people that have these frivolous cases that are
Yeah.
taking up the court's valuable time, paying attorneys to argue the respective sides and taking up a day of the court's time. Now, this person sitting in the back with the bruises on her face, she's not getting access to the court that day. She's got to come back
Mm,
another day and maybe
yeah.
another day.
Right.
Those cases need to be given priority and precedence, and they need to move first. Those are the people truly that are victims of domestic violence that need the orders of protection and the protection of the law.
Yeah. Yeah. So James, how can people find you or get your book?
Sure. So the book is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble uh, under Unequal Justice, or certainly search my name. And same with podcasts. I've done many podcasts over the last year, and they're on YouTube and Spotify. Just simply Google or search my name or the title of the book, Unequal Justice, and you'll find a whole litany of those. I have a website dedicated to the book, which is unequal-justice.com, which is through the publishing company. And I also have my own website from my law practice, porfidolaw.com. So I'm very easy to find, and certainly Justice with Porfido is another website, so it's a little complicated. So just search my name, you'll find me. It's very simple.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I took a whole bunch of notes with some very helpful tips I know that our audience will appreciate.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It was a great opportunity. And we didn't even talk about the domestic violence cases that were in the book that I spoke about, which were really challenging cases and really difficult cases. And
Well, we have to get you back. We'll have to
yeah,
pick another date and talk, do some storytelling.
sounds great. Look forward
All
to it.
right. Take care. All right.
Thanks so
Thanks so
much.
much,
It
James.
was a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.